Welcome to the Debunkers podcast.
Ever feel like sometimes we're all a little more alone together these days? That flicker of genuine connection, it feels harder to grasp, maybe. Even when we're surrounded by people or, constantly online, it's a feeling that seems to resonate with so many of us. And, well, it turns out it's not just in our heads. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something pretty impactful, this pervasive decline of social connection and the global rise of individualism. And it's reshaping our personal lives, our communities, our workplaces, even how whole societies function.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to pull back the curtain on this phenomenon. We've got a fascinating stack of sources, everything from big academic studies and government advisories to historical analyses and sociological reports. We'll try to extract the most important insights, some are actually quite surprising, to help you truly understand the scope, the kind of unexpected causes, and the far-reaching consequences of this shift.
So you'll discover how this individualistic tide is affecting everything from, say, civic participation and how we use public spaces, to the very nature of our friendships, our family dynamics, and even, quite dramatically, our public health. But it's not all, doom and gloom. We'll also explore what innovative solutions and strategies are emerging to help us rebuild those vital connections we seem to be craving. Okay, so let's start maybe by looking at the bigger picture. This idea that we're becoming more individualistic. It isn't just a feeling, like some generational complaint, right? It's actually a measurable global trend. There's solid research behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really insightful here comes from this massive study called Global Increases in Individualism. Researchers looked at 51 years of data across 77 countries. 51 years. And the finding is pretty undeniable. Individualism is on the rise in most societies worldwide. But it's how it shows up that's really eye-opening. They looked at these subtle, practical indicators. Things like, Americans and Japanese giving their children increasingly unique names, that was one, and a kind of quiet decline in multi-generational households, plus rising divorce rates. They even tracked language use in books, how words reflecting individualist themes like self, unique, me have surged, while collectivistic words like obedience, belong, and we have steadily decreased over time. It really signals this deep, almost invisible cultural reorientation towards the me rather than the we.
Wow. So, okay, this isn't just a Western thing then, it's happening globally. But beyond those fascinating, almost subconscious metrics, how does this trend sort of express itself more broadly in our societies?
Well, zooming out a bit, Martin Jacques, in his reflections on what he called the age of selfishness, offers a really compelling perspective. This was after he returned to Britain. He observed what he described as rampant individualism corroding our personal lives, politics, and popular culture. What really struck him was this coarsening of tone in public life, a sort of palpable loss of meaning in shared experiences, and an almost obsessive infatuation with the new that seemed to substitute for, deeper substance. He also pointed to a decline in manners, in respect, and even a weaker sense of the future. Things like falling birth rates and less shared parenting time, he saw those as connected. It's like society losing its collective anchor.
That sounds like a pretty powerful indictment. You're suggesting the shift isn't just about individual choices, but something much more deeply embedded, maybe even influenced by our economic systems. Could you quickly unpack what hyper-individualism means there? Is it just more individualism or something different?
That's a great question, yeah. It's a key distinction. So, the source looking at intentional community and capitalism argues that capitalism isn't just an economic system. It acts as this pervasive culture that really influences our psychology. It suggests that this system fosters what they call hyper-individualism. That's where the pursuit of individual gain and autonomy becomes so extreme, it actually erodes the bonds and shared responsibilities that traditionally hold a society together. This intense focus on privacy, competition, objectification, entitlement, it then cascades into these profound experiences of separation, isolation, loneliness, and fear. It's a powerful argument for how economic structures can really shape our most fundamental relationships and even our sense of self.
And what really seems to connect all these threads is this idea of social capital. It's like the invisible glue holding our communities together, right? But our sources suggest that glue might be, losing its stickiness. That seems concerning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Robert Putnam's work, Bowling Alone, really laid this out brilliantly. It's a classic. He defines social capital as that whole rich interweaving of social commitments, voluntary groups, shared celebrations, duties, rituals, all the stuff that creates a sense of interconnectedness. Putnam provided compelling evidence of a significant decline in this capital, starting way back in the 1960s. He noted less participation in pretty much everything: religious groups, civic organizations, even voting, volunteering, unions. His iconic image, of course, was people bowling alone rather than in leagues. It just captured this measurable decrease in collective engagement so perfectly.
And it seems this decline didn't slow down. Our sources actually argue it really picked up speed as we entered the 21st century.
That's right, it actually accelerated. The precipitous decline of America's social capital article argues this erosion, quote, accelerated in the first 2 decades of this 21st century. It points to these major capital-destroying events like contentious elections, offshoring of jobs, the 2008 market meltdown, increased political polarization. The 2010s were even starkly labeled a decade of distrust and a decade of loss. A loss of faith in institutions, hope in the American dream, and frankly, a loss of charity in public discourse. It really makes you wonder how these huge macro events chip away at that foundational trust and shared purpose that define social capital, leaving us feeling more isolated.
Yeah, it's clear this individualistic tide and erosion of social capital shapes how we interact in public. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Our sources show this kind of stratification also impacts other vital forms of community engagement.
That's absolutely correct. The growing class divide research highlights a pretty substantial educational divide in how people use public spaces. College graduates, for instance, they use public libraries and parks far more than people with less formal education. And what's maybe even more revealing is that over 1 in 5 Americans live in communities with minimal or no access to public or commercial spaces where they might just bump into neighbors. We even heard from Sarah, she's 37 from Pennsylvania, who explicitly said past negative encounters made her wary of extending herself.
Yeah.
And it just illustrates how a lack of social trust can directly stop interaction, creating this self-reinforcing cycle of isolation.
And this divide extends beyond just public spaces, right? Into other forms of community engagement too.
Yes, exactly. The same disconnected source paints a broader picture. Americans with college degrees join non-religious community groups, hobby groups, neighborhood associations, sports leagues, about 3 times as much as their peers with high school degrees or less. And this disparity applies to volunteering too. And it's not always just a lack of desire. There's this poignant example of Paul, an unemployed 47-year-old from Texas. He genuinely wants to volunteer, but faces significant transportation barriers and limited funds. So it's not just a matter of willingness sometimes, but also these systemic barriers affecting participation.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and get even more personal. How is this whole global shift impacting our closest relationships, our friendships, our family lives?
Yeah, this is where it gets really close to home for many people. The State of American Friendship Report reveals this worrying and maybe counterintuitive trend. Americans generally have smaller social networks and fewer close friends, and they spend less time with them. What's fascinating are the factors contributing to this. People are marrying later, sure, and they're more geographically mobile, moving for jobs and such. But here's a surprising one. Parents are spending twice as much time with their children compared to previous generations, which, sounds great on one level, but it can actually crowd out other vital relationships, like friendships. And perhaps most tellingly, Americans are now more likely to make friends at work than anywhere else. It really reflects a fundamental shift in where our privately social bonds are actually forming.
And it also seems like there are pretty significant differences in how men and women are navigating these social landscapes.
Definitely. The data shows women generally report higher satisfaction with their number of friends. They're also much more likely than men to have had, say, a private conversation, sharing personal feelings, or received emotional support, or even told a friend they love them in the past week. What's really intriguing, though, is that young men are increasingly relying on their parents for personal support. That trend has more than doubled since 1990. However, men who do have female friends are significantly more likely to express their feelings and receive emotional support. So it highlights these distinct and maybe sometimes concerning gendered patterns in how we seek and receive support.
And what about technology? Our ubiquitous digital technology, where does that fit into all of this? We spend so much time seemingly connected online, but is it the right kind of connection?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The source on the reconfiguration of social bonds in the digital age argues that smartphones and social media have profoundly transformed human interactions, but not always for the better. These digital tools can actually restrict fundamental experiences that are essential for emotional and cognitive development. Things like leading to an absence of eye contact or an impoverishment of verbal interactions. We see this in the phenomenon of phubbing, snubbing someone right in front of you in favor of your phone. It's a clear example, and let's be honest, many of us are probably guilty of it sometimes. I know I am. Even in family settings or social gatherings, you see people engaged with their digital networks rather than with each other. It creates this palpable interpersonal disconnection, even when we're physically in the same room.
And sometimes this withdrawal, this pulling away, it can take a much more extreme and concerning form, can't it? Like a really profound isolation.
Unfortunately, yes. And that brings us to the phenomenon of Hikikomori. It's a Japanese term that describes both the condition of severe social withdrawal and the individuals who experience it. These are people who literally shut themselves off from society. They often remain isolated in their homes for extended periods, months, sometimes even years. And crucially, this isn't just a Japanese issue anymore. The source indicates its stark global prevalence. Estimates suggest maybe 7 million hikikomoris in the US, 1.4 million young people in France, 350,000 in Korea, over 60,000 students in Italy. It just underscores how severe and widespread this extreme form of isolation has become, a truly global concern.
So all these trends, we're talking global individualism, eroding social capital, changes in friendship, even extreme isolation, they add up to more than just a vague feeling of unease. They contribute to a genuine public health crisis, impacting all of us.
This is precisely what the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on our epidemic of loneliness and isolation really hammers home. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, he didn't mince words. He declared loneliness and isolation an epidemic, And the numbers, when you look at them, are truly stark. Lacking social connection can increase the risk for premature death as much as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes? Economically, we're talking billions. Social isolation among older adults accounts for an estimated $6.7 billion in excess Medicare spending annually. And stress-related absenteeism due to loneliness. That costs employers an estimated $154 billion annually. Huge numbers. Perhaps most critically, approximately half of U.S. adults now report experiencing loneliness. Half. The highest rates are among young adults. That rate is actually higher than for many major physical health issues like smoking or diabetes. It also profoundly impacts mental health, significantly increasing the risk of developing dementia by about 50% in older adults. And it's a strong predictor of suicidal ideation and self-harm. It's a health crisis hiding in plain sight, really.
And this lack of connection, it also seems to undermine our ability to come together, to respond collectively to challenges. Whether that's a natural disaster or, say, a public health crisis like we just experienced, it makes us more vulnerable as a society, doesn't it?
That's a crucial point, absolutely. It speaks to the very fabric of how society functions. The Surgeon General's advisory emphasizes how social connection directly impacts community resilience to natural hazards, community safety, economic prosperity. And there's another study, The Tragedy of the Commons, that directly links individualism to public health outcomes during crises. It found this direct correlation. The more individualistic a country was, the more COVID-19 cases and mortalities it had. The research also showed that individualistic participants were less likely to adhere to epidemic prevention measures. It really illustrates how a strong focus on individual self-interest rather than collective well-being can be truly detrimental during a shared crisis.
Okay, wow. It's definitely a lot to take in, and it paints a concerning picture. But thankfully, our sources also offer some rays of hope. They outline actionable strategies to rebuild connection, from our workplaces to our broader communities.
Yeah, and that's the intriguing part, right? Even facing these huge challenges, solutions are emerging. Let's start in the workplace, since that's where many connections now form. The source on building culture and connection in a fully remote work environment offers some really positive trends for managing remote teams, which is so relevant now. The core principles seem to be empathetic leadership, regular check-ins that focus on well-being and mental health, not just tasks, and actively facilitating collaboration, both within closed teams and across wider networks. Practical tips include things like encouraging employees to support each other, making virtual meetings genuinely inclusive, maybe using tools like emojis to ensure everyone gets a voice, and crucially, really getting to know employees as individuals, building trust, celebrating team wins, even creating non-work-related virtual lunches where people share photos of kids or pets. These small things can make a huge difference. These are practical steps that acknowledge the deep human need for connection, even within professional settings.
Those are practical steps for organizations, which is vital, definitely useful. But what about solutions at a broader societal level, things that impact all of us?
Right, looking at the bigger picture, the Surgeon General's advisory proposes this comprehensive national strategy to advance social connection. It's built on 6 pillars. A key one is strengthening social infrastructure in local communities. And this isn't just about building more community centers, though that's part of it. It means designing our built environments, our towns, our cities, to naturally promote connection. It also means establishing and scaling community connection programs and investing in those local institutions like libraries or parks or clubs that intrinsically bring people together. Another vital pillar is to cultivate a culture of connection. This emphasizes actively instilling values like kindness, respect, service, commitment to one another. Modeling these values in leadership at all levels and expanding conversations about social connection in our schools, workplaces, and communities. It's really about a holistic, systemic approach to try and reweave our social fabric.
And for those looking for maybe even more intentional grassroots approaches to community building, going even further than just boosting local institutions.
That raises an important point about how individuals and small groups can proactively build alternatives. The source on intentional community and capitalism highlights intentional communities, or ICs, as these kind of idealistic responses to the problems of society. These communities are fundamentally about sharing lives, resources, land, purpose. They aim to cultivate deep belonging and accountability. They essentially serve as living laboratories for experimentation and learning about how to share resources equitably, democratically, and peacefully. They offer a tangible alternative model to the hyper-individualism that's so prevalent in mainstream society. They really demonstrate that profound connection isn't just some lost dream, but it's actually achievable when it's intentionally prioritized.
So, after exploring all of this, what does it all mean for you, for our listeners, as you navigate a world that, feels increasingly disconnected, yet clearly seems to yearn for connection?
Well, I think this deep dive has shown us that the decline of social connection and the rise of individualism, it's a really complex, multifaceted issue. It affects us from global trends and huge economic systems right down to our most personal relationships and even our physical health. It's a significant challenge, no doubt, one that permeates so many aspects of our lives. But importantly, our sources also reveal a clear path forward. It seems to be one that prioritizes empathy, intentional action, and a renewed commitment to collective well-being. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering all we've discussed and the really profound impact of connection on both individual and societal health, what small intentional step could you take this week? Something to bridge a gap, strengthen a bond, or actively cultivate that culture of connection in your own life or your community. Perhaps it's reaching out to an old friend you haven't spoken to in a while, or maybe volunteering for a local cause, even for an hour, or maybe something as simple as just striking up a conversation with someone new in your neighborhood. Those small steps can add up. But sadly, it seems we've run out of time for today.
Thank you so much for listening and for being such an engaged part of our podcast.
We always value your participation.
Until our next deep dive together.
Goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.